Anger is a fire that first begins by burning us from the inside. We think we are angry at someone else, but the first one who suffers is our own peace, our own clarity, our own heart. Where flames are rising, love cannot survive, wisdom has no space. True strength is not in displaying anger, but in being able to transform that fire into something healing, something that protects relationships and keeps the heart alive. Anger is a fire that rises fast and blinds the mind. It makes a person forget who they truly are and forces them into actions they later regret. When that fire takes over, it burns peace, destroys judgment, and turns calm moments into chaos. A heart filled with flames cannot feel kindness, cannot think clearly, and cannot recognize love standing right in front of it. This fire doesn't just hurt others, it first hurts the one who carries it. Every second spent in anger steals days of peace. A single harsh word spoken in rage can leave scars that last a lifetime. We believe anger gives us control, yet in reality it takes control away from us. It becomes the master and we become the weapon. That is how anger fools a person into thinking they are powerful while they are actually the most fragile. But anger is not a person's nature. It is only a reaction, a temporary storm passing through the heart. When the storm settles, regret appears. No human being is born with rage in their soul. Anger enters when pain is ignored, when ego becomes loud, when wounds go unhealed. Understanding this truth allows a person to step away from the fire instead of letting it rule their actions. Calmness is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength. Choosing silence over shouting and patience over reaction is not losing. It is winning against the emotion that wants to destroy everything valuable. Breath by breath, a person can cool the fire within. A moment of pause can stop a disaster. A soft voice can save a relationship. Anger does not solve problems, it only increases distance and deepens wounds. Instead of letting anger turn you into someone unrecognizable, transform that energy into something meaningful. Let it become courage, clarity, and determination. Let your heart stay soft enough to love yet strong enough to protect peace. When anger melts into understanding, what remains is a person who can heal rather than hurt, build rather than break, and live without flames burning their own soul. Anger is a voice that rises when the heart is hurt and no one notices the pain. It is not born from power, but from wounds that were never healed. When emotions bleed silently, anger becomes their language. It shouts because the heart feels unheard, it erupts because suffering was ignored for too long. Deep inside every angry moment, there is a hidden story of disappointment, betrayal, or fear. The louder the anger, the deeper the pain buried beneath it. People who carry the strongest rage are often the ones who once cared the most. Their anger is not against the world alone, but against the wounds that made them feel weak, unseen, or unloved. But anger does not want destruction, it wants acknowledgement. It wants someone to understand the ache it hides behind harsh words and fierce expressions. When emotions are allowed to speak freely, the storm inside starts to soften. When a person listens to their own heart instead of fighting it, the fire inside them loses its fuel. It is easy to point fingers at behavior, but true transformation begins when we look at the wound causing it. Every burst of anger is a message saying something inside needs healing. Instead of reacting to anger with anger, understanding turns the burning flames into light that reveals the truth behind the hurt. When the heart is comforted, anger has no reason to scream. When the pain is allowed to be felt, the noise inside becomes quiet. Healing does not come by suppressing anger, but by listening to what it is trying to protect. The moment the hidden hurt is embraced, anger melts away and a stronger, calmer and wiser heart rises in its place. Breath is the first thing that changes when anger rises. It becomes fast, sharp and heavy, feeding the fire inside. When breathing loses control, the mind loses control with it. The heart starts to race, thinking becomes blurred, and the smallest spark can turn into an explosion. Taking back control of the breath is the first step to taking back control of yourself. A deep breath is not just air entering the body. It is a command to the mind to slow down and a signal to the heart to soften. When you inhale deeply, you create space between your reaction and your response. That space is where wisdom lives. That space is where you choose what kind of human you want to be in that moment. Anger wants you to act immediately, without thinking. It pushes you to say words that burn and make decisions that break. But one slow breath interrupts anger's power. It tells the brain that there is no danger, no need for aggression. Each calm breath weakens the fire, turning flames into embers that can no longer destroy. Breathing with awareness also lets you feel the true reason behind the anger. Sometimes the fire is not about the situation in front of you, but about an old wound that still hurts. When you breathe deeply, you connect to that hidden pain and understand it instead of letting it command you. Slowly the breath begins to wash away the heaviness that anger has built inside. With every controlled breath, you become bigger than your rage. Instead of being a prisoner of your emotions, you become their leader. The breath becomes a shield, silent, invisible, yet powerful enough to protect you from the harm you could cause yourself and others. When your breath is calm, no emotion can burn you alive. Words are the instruments through which anger often finds its way out of the heart. The moment you speak in rage, the words carry more power than you realize. They can cut, wound and create scars that remain long after the anger has faded. Each angry sentence is like throwing fuel onto a fire, feeding the very flames that are trying to be controlled. Speaking without thinking turns a momentary feeling into a lasting consequence. The mind often rushes to justify the anger, to defend itself and its pain. It convinces you that letting the words out will bring relief or prove a point. But relief from words spoken in fury is an illusion. The truth is that every harsh word pushes others away and leaves behind regret that cannot be taken back. Once spoken, words cannot be erased, and their weight is carried by both the speaker and the listener. When you pause before speaking, you give your heart a chance to speak differently. The delay creates a space where choice exists. In that space, you can decide whether the words will heal or harm, whether they will destroy or protect. Silence in anger is not weakness, it is mastery. It is the first step in transforming the fire into light. Thoughtful speech requires seeing beyond the immediate moment. Often anger is triggered by misunderstanding, ego or fear. If you speak without awareness, you attack shadows, illusions and past wounds that have nothing to do with the present. Choosing words with clarity ensures that your speech aligns with truth and compassion rather than the blind impulse of rage. The power of words lies not in their volume, but in their intention. Words spoken with control, even in difficult moments, have the ability to calm, guide and reconcile. By thinking before you speak, anger loses its dominance over you. You become the master of your own voice, and your words become tools for building bridges instead of burning them. A pause is a small but powerful act that interrupts the automatic flow of anger. When the mind is overwhelmed with fury, every reaction feels urgent, as if the next word or action must happen immediately. Acting in that moment without pause hands control over to the anger itself, allowing it to dictate choices, words and deeds. The pause creates a break in the chain, giving the person a moment to reclaim authority over their own response. During that pause, the body and mind begin to reset. the racing heartbeat slows, the muscles loosen and the mind gains clarity. What once seemed like an unstoppable force now appears manageable. Even a few seconds can be enough to cool the immediate heat of emotion and prevent the surge from spilling into destructive action. That brief interval is a shield protecting relationships, reputation, and the self from unnecessary harm. The pause also opens space for perspective. When anger is immediate, the mind sees only the trigger, exaggerates the insult and amplifies injustice. But with even a short delay, it becomes possible to recognize the context, consider the other person's intentions, and separate what is real from what is imagined. The pause allows judgment to reassert itself over raw emotion, preventing impulsive acts that would later be regretted. Silence during anger is a form of power, not submission. It signals to the mind that you are not a slave to the heat inside you. By refusing to act instantly, the pause gives you the ability to choose wisely. It transforms the reaction from an explosion into a considered, deliberate response. Every choice made after a pause carries strength and control that immediate anger cannot provide. Repeatedly practicing this pause builds mastery over the self. It trains the mind to resist the first impulse, to slow down, and to think before acting. Over time, the pause becomes a habit and anger loses its ability to control decisions. A life lived with this small but deliberate interruption experiences fewer regrets, healthier relationships, and a heart less consumed by fire. Not every hurt needs to become a weapon aimed at someone else. When pain is held too tightly, it twists into anger and then seeks release in ways that harm both the giver and the receiver. Every insult, every slight, every disappointment does not need to be turned into a battle. When the heart chooses to carry it lightly, the wound stops growing and the mind stops plotting revenge. Pain only becomes destructive when it is turned outward as a weapon instead of inward as a lesson. The urge to strike back often comes from the desire to prove oneself right or to assert control. Yet striking back rarely fixes the problem. It only escalates conflict, creates more suffering, and leaves a person trapped in a cycle of retaliation. Recognizing this allows a person to pause before action, to ask whether responding with anger truly serves them or simply feeds the fire. By choosing not to weaponize hurt, the heart remains strong and unbroken. Anger that emerges from hurt is temporary, but the effects of using it as a weapon can be permanent. Words spoken in fury cannot be taken back, and actions carried out in rage can destroy trust and relationships. Each time pain is converted into aggression, the soul grows heavier and the heart becomes colder. Learning to feel hurt without reacting violently is a form of strength that protects both the self and others. Choosing not to turn hurt into a weapon requires self-awareness. It demands observing the reaction before letting it take over. It asks for honesty about one's own emotions and the courage to resist immediate impulses. By doing so, a person separates themselves from the rawness of the moment and steps into a space where clarity and wisdom guide the next move. The pain remains, but it no longer controls the behavior. When hurt is held without aggression, it transforms into understanding, resilience and empathy. The heart learns that pain can exist without creating destruction. It becomes possible to acknowledge the wound, learn from it, and release it without harming anyone else. This practice strengthens the heart, softens the mind, and ensures that anger never becomes a weapon capable of burning what is precious. Ego often disguises itself as truth, making the mind believe that anger is justified and necessary. When pride is wounded, even the smallest disagreement can feel like an attack, and every word or action against us is magnified into an insult. The heart begins to burn not because the world is wrong, but because the self refuses to be questioned or challenged. Separating ego from truth is the first step toward seeing reality clearly. Anger fueled by ego rarely reflects the situation as it is. It distorts perception, exaggerates slights, and twists intentions. A person convinced of their own righteousness becomes blind to understanding, compassion, or compromise. Every interaction then becomes a battle to defend pride rather than an opportunity to resolve or learn. The fire inside grows hotter not because of the event itself, but because the ego refuses to release control. When the mind steps back and recognizes the difference between ego and truth, a powerful clarity emerges. The heart realizes that being right is not always necessary and that the pursuit of dominance over a situation often costs more than it gains. Pride loses its grip and anger begins to weaken. What once seemed intolerable can now be examined with calmness, and decisions are guided by reason rather than impulse. Understanding this separation also frees relationships from unnecessary conflict. When ego is set aside, listening becomes possible. Communication shifts from proving oneself to understanding the other. Arguments lose their intensity and bridges are built instead of burned. Anger, instead of exploding, can be acknowledged, processed, and released without leaving lasting damage. Repeated practice of separating ego from truth strengthens the mind and heart. It trains a person to respond to challenges with wisdom rather than defensiveness, to act with intention rather than reaction. The space between event and response grows wider and anger loses its ability to control behavior. In this space, a calmer, stronger, and more compassionate self emerges, capable of facing the world without being consumed by pride. Everyone makes mistakes, yet the heart often treats them as betrayals or failures that must be punished. When someone errs, it is easy to focus on the harm done rather than the humanity behind it. Holding on to anger over mistakes only prolongs suffering and hardens the mind. Recognizing that error is a natural part of life allows the heart to remain soft even in the face of disappointment. Mistakes are not proof of weakness, but evidence of trying. Every wrong choice, every failure, and every misstep carries a lesson waiting to be understood. When the focus shifts from blame to learning, the energy that fuels anger dissipates. Understanding that everyone, including ourselves, is prone to error softens judgment and opens space for compassion. Forgiveness becomes possible when mistakes are seen as human. Anger thrives on holding grudges, but accepting imperfection removes its foundation. Every time a person learns to let go of resentment over another's error, the heart grows stronger and calmer. Acceptance does not mean approving of wrong actions, it means refusing to let them control emotions or destroy inner peace. Seeing mistakes as part of the human story creates humility. It reminds us that no one is flawless and that we all carry our own hidden struggles. This awareness prevents the heart from becoming hardened by unrealistic expectations. It allows patience to arise where judgment once dominated, and it transforms conflict into understanding. Living with this perspective, anger loses much of its power. A mistake no longer triggers an uncontrollable fire because the mind recognizes the inevitability of imperfection. The heart learns to respond with patience and wisdom, turning every error into an opportunity for growth rather than a reason for bitterness. Anger, when understood and controlled, can become a source of energy rather than destruction. The raw heat of fury carries a force that can be redirected to action, effort, and change. Every surge of adrenaline that comes with anger has the potential to fuel determination if the mind chooses direction over reaction. When the fire is channeled consciously, it stops being a threat and starts being a tool. The energy within anger can sharpen focus. A person filled with controlled intensity becomes capable of extraordinary effort, tackling challenges that would normally feel impossible. The key is not to suppress the feeling, but to convert it into a disciplined drive. When the heat of frustration is applied to solving problems or creating solutions, it builds resilience instead of tearing everything apart. Anger can also awaken clarity. The strong emotion forces a person to recognize what is truly important, what must be addressed, and what can be released. Instead of allowing anger to cloud judgment, conscious direction turns it into a spotlight, revealing where attention, effort, and courage are needed. In this way, anger becomes an instrument of insight rather than chaos. Transformation of anger into power requires awareness and choice. The moment a person notices the surge, they can decide whether to explode or to act. By redirecting the energy toward constructive action, the fire that once threatened relationships or inner peace now fuels personal growth, creativity, or justice. Controlled anger strengthens character instead of weakening it. When anger is consistently transformed into power, it stops being a destructive cycle. The heart remains strong without hardening, and the mind stays alert without becoming reactive. This energy becomes a source of courage, drive, and determination, enabling a person to face challenges boldly, take decisive action, and achieve goals that might otherwise have seemed out of reach. Love and gentleness are not signs of weakness, but expressions of deep strength. A heart that remains open even in the face of hostility holds a power that anger can never match. When challenges arise, reacting with softness does not mean surrendering, it means choosing a path that preserves clarity, peace, and connection. The gentleness of the heart becomes a shield that protects both the self and those around it. Practicing love in every interaction changes the nature of conflict. Words spoken with compassion calm tension before it escalates, and actions rooted in kindness prevent small disagreements from turning into lasting wounds. A gentle approach does not ignore truth or justice, but it delivers both without adding heat to an already burning situation. Consistency in gentleness teaches others how to respond, creating an environment where anger loses its grip. The heart that chooses love repeatedly builds resilience. Each act of patience and understanding strengthens the mind, making it less susceptible to provocation. Gentleness becomes a habit, shaping perception and reaction. Over time, the individual learns to meet hostility with calm, to face frustration with patience, and to transform potential conflicts into opportunities for connection rather than division. Gentleness and love also protect the internal world. By responding with softness instead of aggression, the heart avoids the corrosive effects of bitterness and resentment. Peace becomes the default state, and anger cannot linger for long. A calm and loving heart creates space for clarity, focus, and intentional action, even in the most challenging circumstances. A life guided by love and gentleness transforms not only the self but also the world around. Relationships deepen, trust is restored, and influence grows through respect rather than fear. A soft heart does not surrender to challenges but absorbs and redirects the fire of tension, turning potential destruction into harmony. In every moment, love becomes the strongest force, capable of cooling the hottest flames and sustaining the truest power.